Hello, everyone. How are you all today? My name is Gigi Giannoni. I'm Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for Gables Residential. I've been in the real estate industry, both multifamily, hospitality, for sale, for longer than I care to remember, so I won't share the number because then you'll figure out how old I am. But I am very excited to be here today. My responsibility is anything and everything that touches the internal and external customer at our company, along with strategic initiatives, public relations, communications, all things marketing, DEI, and sustainability. So looking forward to our conversation today.
Alex.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners of Cedar Street Companies, a multifamily national developer. Also one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Lively, a prop technology. So I touch across things from design architecture, construction development, property management, and then the PropTech space is the resident experience and how we can kind of continue to innovate in the multifamily space. Been around for 20 years.
Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Seljac. I'm an SVP at LaSalle Investment Management. LaSalle is one of the world's leading real estate investment management companies with over 73 billion in assets under management in 15 countries. I head up our asset level PropTech group, as well as lead many of our ESG initiatives, especially when they're tech related, our health and wellness certification process for our properties, and many of our social, property level social and corporate initiatives, including leading our Red Cross partnership. I've been in the business for over 20 years, been in multifamily asset management for the last 10, and just happy to see everybody.
We're very happy you're here too, Kelly. Adrian.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Adrian. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Experience and Innovation at Greystar. My role is a mix of, on the innovation side, trying to help our clients and property owners navigate the world of PropTech and source and pilot and scale vendors that are really working in the space, and then also lead some strategic initiatives around operational transformation. I'm pretty new to the real estate industry and multifamily. Just been with Greystar in the industry for 2 years, but my background was in management consulting, really leading digital transformations in a variety of other industries before coming to Greystar.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Well, welcome. So I had the pleasure of producing a lot of the content for the event, and I really was excited to put together this panel because this year we've seen a ton of innovation and technology. A lot of these things that we've been hearing about, we've been talking about for a while, and I titled the panel Buzzworthy. A lot of these words have just become buzzwords. And what I really wanted to do today is dive into the nitty-gritty of all of the technology and the resident experience space, and feel, what are you guys doing, and what is actually working, and what is really driving leases and tenant experience. So to start us off today, we're all faced with a ton of buying decisions this year. I'm sure you've been pitched a million times. How are you making those buying decisions, and what does that process look like?
I can kick us off. We've been really looking at this year for us, given how much PropTech we've been looking at, have really focused on driving property NOI, and really with a focus on how do we drive, for residents especially, our renewal rates and our renewal rent values. And so everything we're doing, we're trying to find ways to tie it back to those numbers. And so we've really focused on that and trying to find, there's, especially on the amenity and resident side, it feels like there's a lot of things that get pitched, but hard to figure out which of those add value. So we've been trying to dig into our data and figure out which of those actually drive renewal at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at LaSalle we actually try to start, because there's so many options and so many companies to evaluate, we try to start with solving a problem that we know of, and if we get beyond that, then we're trying to find PropTech that actually drives additional revenue or saves us cost. And then there's many free or no cost to the owner that we look at. They're all low-hanging fruit, right? So we start with a low-hanging fruit and then move on to ones that actually cost the ownership something, and then try to measure that benefit that we get back from the cost, whether that be an ESG benefit, a certification increase in score, or more likability on reviews from your tenants. And trying to quantify the value and the ROI if there's not a direct increase in rent or decrease in expense. It's what's market and what is going to make sure that our property lasts for the long haul.
Yeah, I'd like to continue on what Kelly and Adrian had mentioned. I think it falls into 3 different buckets. It's thinking about what is the problem it solves, I think is a really important aspect. Understanding what that problem is and how it gets solved is very important. I think that's like a priority, at least of what we've seen, a priority for groups. The next one I felt like in the order of priorities was, how do we save money? Is the first, is it creating efficiencies, time or money efficiencies? And then of course that drops the bottom line. Those 2 are easier to quantify and are more direct. And then you have the other components are, how do we improve the resident experience? And through that resident experience, is there convenience? And from those things, creating an amazing resident or consumer experience translates to usual retention. Yeah. Again, that's more subjective, and then it's harder today to understand or qualify or quantify that improvement, and I think those are some of the challenges you see with the technology, is how do you really understand the value or benefit created?
I absolutely agree with my cohorts, but where I think all right, just making sure everybody's awake now. Is everybody awake? I agree with my cohorts, but where I do disagree is I think the challenge that we have in the multifamily industry, specifically in the apartment industry, is that we are playing catch up from a technology perspective. So those of you that have been in the apartment industry know that we have a tendency to focus a lot on ROI, on NOI, but really focusing on the basics of how we operate and not necessarily the component as a whole. So I think one of the challenges that we find from a perspective of technology is trying to determine what the challenge is today and how that's going to get us there in the future, but also then what is the challenge going to be tomorrow, because technology is changing so quickly that how we solve for it today is not necessarily how we're going to solve for it tomorrow. So I think identifying those challenges today could be short-term challenges. Do we think those are the same challenges for tomorrow? And then how are we going to evaluate the technology to make sure that what we select is going to be evolving as we evolve with our challenges and as our business changes? So that's the only other thing I wanted to add to that equation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Alex said something that I think was interesting about the subjective versus hard data measurement experience. Do you find with technology amenities, is it easier for you to measure return on investment, or as opposed to, is this pool gonna add more value to my asset, or is it more difficult?
So the only thing I will say about that is that I think you can measure it to a certain degree, but a lot of the customer experience is not necessarily measured in quantifiable data on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of the customer experience you'll see from whether it be the renewal rates, whether it be ratings and reviews, whether it be what's being posted on social media. And so sometimes for investors or lenders, it's not necessarily a hardcore measurement that they place value on, but we do. As owners and operators, we definitely place value on that. So it's trying to figure out where the balance is between the actual hardcore data and what your residents are telling you and how you're closing the back door. So that whole experience perspective has to be balanced with the data equation. Because even though technology is important, it's still a business about people, and we're creating homes and where they live. And so that is a critical thing to remember about that.
Yeah, I'd like to add, and I completely agree, I think technology is a small piece of the entire puzzle. And when you think about overall customer experience in every other industry, it's the entire package. It's like the moment you sign or get a package from Apple and you get the device, like that whole experience from the beginning of the resident journey through the entire process is what creates the value, and combining those pieces makes 1 + 1 = 3 or 5. So technology is only one aspect of that can help. And again, some pieces are very quantifiable and some are subjective, and that's where I think the challenges again lie, to understanding how to gather that data. There's so many different touch points, and understanding those touch points, piecing them together, I think it's different pieces put together that really put together.
Definitely. in terms of something that we can look at, we can look at leasing and conversion of leads. Are you finding any specific technologies that residents are looking for and expecting that will lead to new leases in your assets?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that we've been seeing, especially on the leasing side, is like the smart building and having a real, curb to couch, as it kind of continues to be called, of making sure that we have not only just the smart building so that it's set up for a resident, but also now I think residents are really starting to look and challenge us on, can my DoorDash driver make it all the way up? So are we set up in a way that it's not just our residents, but our guests, our vendors, are able to get in, and they really are looking for that simplicity. I would also say like that the EV charging, and especially as both from the having people's having the electric cars and wanting to be able to charge them in the building is becoming more and more of a key amenity. And I think also for us in terms of telling a story around sustainability, it's something that it's kind of a double-edged sword for us in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sustainability for our target market and at our general buildings is between ages 20 to 35, and sustainability is something that they care about and look for. EV charging stations being one of the issues, green walls, healthy air, that kind of thing. However, I feel like the tech that's really driving a lot of new leases versus renewals would be the virtual tours, AI and machine learning, leasing assistance, so people can find out information on their own time, in their off hours, maybe not during your office hours. Maybe they just don't want to talk to somebody right now, or they're texting while they're working, the leasing assistant. The virtual tours, the self-guided tours, I think that, along with pet amenities and the sustainability aspect, are really some of the big ones that we're seeing for new leases. And then for renewal, you really have more of the more typical amenity base, where it's the package solutions, your interior design solutions for the higher end products like Havenly, the concierge service, the grocery delivery like Avo. Lively has a lot of that, I believe, too, and the things that touch them on a day-to-day basis will allow them to feel more comfortable renewing versus looking elsewhere for less of a bump on their renewal lease.
One thing I would love to add is I think everything they're saying is 100% accurate, where it's what the common ground on all of those points are is the reduction in friction in the process to the consumer, making it seamless and simple to be able to distribute any product and service. And I think that's so important for the resident journey. You're seeing like why Amazon became so great is that one-click checkout, and you're seeing all of those components. So reducing that friction and being able to distribute those products and services seamlessly to the consumer is going to really be a game changer for us as a group.
It's all about being fast and easy, right? And it's just like the retail industry and any other industry today. Whereas before, when you just had the opportunity to respond via email, et cetera, you could take 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, and the resident or the prospect will be like, oh, well, they're delivering great service. Well, now, if you don't respond within an hour, you're toast, right?
Where are you, Gigi?
They've moved on. They've left you behind. They don't want to hear about you. They think your service basically stinks. So I think one of the things is really trying to figure out how to get that response time the fastest and the most efficient as possible, because I think both from a resident and prospect perspective, if you do not respond timely, they automatically see that as a quality of how their lifestyle is going to be when they're living at your apartment community, and they don't want any part of it.
Makes sense. There's a point of selecting these technologies, and then there's the usage and figuring out if this works for you in your portfolios. And I know piloting technologies is something that's extremely important, something that you guys are trying out. What challenges do you run into when piloting technologies? And I'm sure I'm opening up a can of worms here, but if you can summarize a bit, what does that process look like for you guys? Kelly, I saw you laughing. We'll start with you.
Well, let's just say, what challenges do we not face trying to pilot new technology? I would say one of the things that I see quite a bit is companies that aren't necessarily evolved enough in the stage that they're in their life to end up complying with our contract requirements for a company of our size. So to even get someone in a single property to test out the product, we have to have a full contract with liability, insurance requirements, and guarantees that will make sure that our ownership doesn't end up getting in trouble for something that we can't foresee today. So that is one big hurdle. Is we want the new and the edgy, but they can't be too new or edgy, or we can't get a contract done. They have to be mature enough to be able to work with us. So that's a problem. And then the contracts, once you've decided to move forward, are very time consuming, especially, I'm assuming I'm not the only real estate company that has this issue where most contracts with our legal team are treated like real estate contracts. And they are looking to prevent every single tiny little piece of risk, which makes contracting with a new startup incredibly difficult. And takes a long time. I've worked on PropTech contracts that took over 9 months, and that's just not an efficient way to be on the cutting edge. And then obviously getting all levels of the company, if you're rolling something out portfolio-wide, the portfolio team who's making the decisions at the client level for us, the asset management team to actually have time to spend to tell the property teams that they are backing this, because they don't know, who I am or whoever's doing the rollout. They want to hear it from their asset manager, and then the property teams and making sure they have time to deal with it as well. So, and I think technology teams are getting better at this, and they realize that this is a pain point, and they're getting better at setting up the rollout and guarantee a certain amount of training time and pre-recorded training so people can do it on their own time. But then the biggest problem is the feedback loop, right? Our investors, our ownership structure, they want to hear, we said we were going to get this % return on ROI. Well, prove it now. It's been in place for 6 months. Did you get that ROI? And being able to pick that piece out, unless you just added an amenity fee, it's tough to prove. So yeah, that is just a short list of the problems that we endure.
I think for us, the greatest challenge and opportunity at the same time is figuring out how to educate and get buy-in from the site teams. So I agree with everything that you have said about the whole experience with negotiating the contracts and then the approval and then the ROI. But I think anything that made the wheel that's going to move this around is going to be the people that are on site. So half of the challenge of launching any pilot is making sure you invest enough time up front to train and educate your associates as to what value it's going to bring to them, how it's going to generate more leases, how it's ultimately going to allow them to make more money so that they can buy into the value of the overall product. And if you invest in the training and the education up front and you test it across the country in different parts of the country, we often find too that a lot of it has to do with the associates that we have on site, what they're used to doing, if they came from other companies, what habits they're bringing with them. So it's as much a psychological approach, right, as it is just kind of a standard process approach. So investing upfront time is equally, if not more important than actually launching the pilot and then seeing what kind of return you get on the investment.
Yeah.
To add to Gigi, I think is a amazing way that she articulated is that without having buy-in from the right staff and property management, you can have the best technology and it won't work. Because if you don't use it, it doesn't work. Technology doesn't, unless you have AI or automation by itself. Without the buy-in that we found one of the largest and biggest challenges is really utilization of the technology. So doing that up front, also adding to Kelly, the contract and sales cycle and kind of going through compliance. A lot of the unknowns or use cases are, PropTech is very new. So every time when we were talking about adding services or experiences, whose liability, who's responsible, understanding as technology transforms, if something bad happens, when like WAG, the dog walking company, something happens, or in a WAG or an Uber, understanding who's responsible for that. So I think the evolution of those things are the challenges we're seeing, but I think at the same time, as we start creating better set standards, it'll continue to improve over time.
Yeah.
I do think what Gigi was saying on, when it's something a pilot that really impacts our team members and the processes and how they do their work, you can never underestimate the amount of change management, but it's amazing even for the low-hanging fruit pilots, and WAG is a perfect example of, WAGs or the Spruce or, Hello Alfred, you're like, oh, this will be easy. We just send a link to our residents, they try it out, they use it. And one of the things that, as we've mystery shopped and kind of gone on site, we realize that when you are a new resident, we ask you, it's like, hey, welcome. We're glad you're in your new home. Please download these 10 apps to access the 10 different amenities that we have at our property. And so I think there's a little bit too of us catching up on the low-hanging fruit side of saying, how does this fit into our experience before we pilot? And I think Lively is a very kind of relevant example here of how do we start to think about giving our residents one place to put these things so that we're not constantly bombarding them and turning our residents into essentially like a free marketing source for ourselves and our vendors.
If I can add one more thing too, I think if anybody in this room is not surveying, whether it be the one quick survey or the 2-question quick survey, that is probably the top thing I would recommend that you do. Survey your associates with frequency. Do not make it overwhelming where they have to answer with a bunch of copy. You can make it a checkpoint, but also survey your residents. So as you roll out a new program, survey your associates to find out what their challenges are, make it anonymous, and the same with residents. If they want to identify themselves, let them identify themselves. But the more frequently you ask for feedback, the chances are you will get feedback, and it will certainly help you throughout the pilot process to identify what the challenges are or what your quick successes are.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add one more thing too. One of the other challenges that we face is PropTech companies trying to make it easy for the integration and easy for the ownership to not have to do anything. So they in their minds are making this easy. Oh, we integrate with RealPage. We do all that. We contact the residents for you. You don't have to do anything. Your management will not have to learn the product or train. So it'll be a seamless integration. Unfortunately, with data privacy issues, a lot of times, depending on the ownership structure, we cannot allow that type of integration, and basically it's cut off a lot of technology options for us right now as our ownership groups come up to speed on technology and feeling comfortable with this level of exposure, and a matter of as well as future-proofing, because they don't know what they don't know, and they're not used to that. So if we sign up with a company that knows about someone's dog, in 6 months, are we going to get in trouble for that because of new legislation? So they generally are hesitant and end up taking longer to make these decisions because of the fear of the unknown. And some of it, obviously, like data privacy is real and is relevant today. And still trying to figure out the solutions that work so you get the technology, but with the data security as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more thing to add, by the way, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but there is nothing that says that you can't pilot competing programs at the same time.
Ooh.
So you don't pilot 20 communities at once. You pick 4 to 7 communities, but you can pilot 2 programs at once. It is not tons of fun, and you have to rely a lot on the relationship that you have with the group that you're piloting with. But I think it creates not only a fair sense of competition between the different communities that are piloting the programs, but it also gives you a lot more data and a lot more questions that you are then able to ask the vendors that are providing the possible service. So, food for thought.
Now, Gigi, do these companies know that you're piloting 2 of them at the same time?
Yes. Look,
Wow.
our industry is way too small to not be forthright and upfront.
True.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Gigi, I think A/B testing gives you really great feedback loops. It gives you a good comparison to really understand. And I think that's become even more norm in the space. So I think the technologies and the companies are very transparent, both sides, in wanting that platform, because if you build good technology, you want that champion challenger type of effects. And then there's some, I would say old technologies that have been around, gives opportunities for some of the new technologies to come in and say, are you the same or are you significantly better, where it makes sense to do switching costs.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've been talking a lot about this two-way conversation. I think that's something that has been fascinating about real estate and technology is as we have been merging the two, real estate has needed a lot of non-real estate tech-savvy people to come in and innovate the industry. But they may or may not be as real estate savvy as we need them to be at the forefront. What does that two-way conversation look like for you all as we're preparing tech companies who are doing a great job innovating the industry but need to learn a few more intricacies about real estate?
So it is definitely a strategic partnership. We have signed on with groups that we feel that are ready, willing, and able to learn about our industry, understand that we have idiosyncrasies just like most industries do, but they also are willing to do some customization, not only just for us, but they'll realize that something that we're sharing with them or what our challenges are can be impactful for other businesses that they're going to go out and source. So they do the implementation and they do the business development behind the scenes for that. So, but I think that's one very important thing is that the groups have to be willing to have the conversations, because the beauty of this is that a lot of companies from outside our industry are coming into our industry, and we need that from a multifamily perspective. The challenge is for both groups that multifamily has not been high on the use of technology. So for us, it's a learning process as well. So it takes a lot more time, energy, and effort for both groups, but if you end up aligning strategically with the right group, it can certainly be a long-term partnership if they're willing to ebb and flow with you.
Yeah.
One of the things I think the best way to describe it is where there will be the most amount of success in companies is thinking of the technology companies as an extension of their companies and creating an agile environment that will allow them to have more of a customer-driven roadmap to help shape the product, to solve the real problems, and having that flexibility, not coming into an industry and saying, this is exactly how you're going to do it. You don't know what you're doing, because multifamily is so fragmented in so many different ways, from systems, processes to hardware. Every company is running it differently. So without having that ability to be agile and creating a customer-driven roadmap, I think that's going to would be a disadvantage. And yes, multifamily is one of the slowest to adopt technology, but it is accelerating. It's been amazing to watch the last 3 years, and some of the biggest companies like Greystar and LaSalle, just amazing to see, how they've become almost their own technology divisions and have such great innovation and are really taking it seriously. And so it's amazing to see the progress.
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit too in that spirit of the two-way conversation of making sure that what we found to be successful is pulling our operators and our different internal teams in, not just the technology team, because while there's a part of it which is getting them to understand our industry, there's also a big part of it which is us going to the whiteboard with them and doing some true operation and process design sessions so that we are also forced to change and improve our processes, so we're not constantly just forcing every vendor, especially those from outside the industry, to basically go back to the lowest common denominator, kind of old school process. So there's a little bit on our side too of innovating from an operations process perspective.
Yeah, this role didn't exist maybe, 7 years ago. I can't even say 10, maybe even 7, maybe 5. These innovation PropTech type roles. So most companies, I would say, don't have a group to work on it, maybe a person, maybe a couple people, depending on the size. A couple big ones I'm sure do, like Blackstone, like the really big ones, and obviously like Greystar. So I assume what I do and what a lot of people do is they kind of lean on other groups. So like we'll lean on Greystar, where like we think this has potential. Will you guys look into it? Tell us what you think. And they will work with the PropTech company and kind of vet them and figure out if they're up to speed enough on real estate, or they're going to be able to integrate with what the real estate needs, because I can't do those all myself. And then we also, LaSalle is a wholly owned subsidiary of JLL, and we have venture funds like Spark, and Spark invests in PropTech, so we can lean on them and find out what they think and if they've worked with them and what issues they see are coming by. So really, it's a lot of like not delegating, but sharing the workload among our peer set in the industry, where everybody can do their best.
Yeah, I love the sharing of ideas. something that Kelly, I know you mentioned earlier, was sustainability, especially as it relates to residents and the growing need for that and desire from residents. ESG as a whole and sustainability, I mean, how important is it actually for residents and you all and your stakeholders? What is that importance? Where are we on that level? Is it real or is it just hype?
Sure. Well, we do constant surveys. We do annual surveys that are very, very long and detailed. We do touchpoint surveys on a continual basis, and reviews, all over the place, apartments.com, modern message, whatever. We do, pointed surveys. Sustainability is important to our renter base. It is, and it used to be, it was good to have, but no one really wanted to pay more for it. And now I think that's shifting. Residents are willing, they are looking out for green buildings with green initiatives and the ability for like maybe direct billing, so they know they're reducing their energy bill and it's making a difference. They're looking for green walls, clean air, clean water, well health and safety, Fitwell certifications, those kind of thing. And then, the investors who fund the buildings, especially European investors, they have a very heavy weight on sustainability in their investing. And your GRESB score, if you are not aware, does weigh what projects you have going on at the property and how sustainable and green it is in your social and DEI initiatives. And it does benefit you, if not to your NOI, then to your property value and what you're going to be able to sell it for in a couple of years if you're looking to sell. And then if it's a commercial property, the tenants, they are looking for it as well. Many of the larger tenants, they have certain qualifications. They're not even going to look at your building if it's not, LEED certified or, one of the BREEAM certification, one of the many different sustainability-related certifications. And then we were talking about earlier, Local Law 97 has come up in New York. This is coming around, after, the world just met for, what's it called? COP, thank you. The world just met for COP. The 2030 and 2050 goals are real. Real estate is not an exception. Real estate makes up 40% of carbon emissions worldwide every year. It is a real number, and it is scary. And then I think 80% of those emissions are built into your building as it's built and as it's destroyed. So we can only affect 20% of those carbon emissions to begin with, right? And so how are we going to reduce our emissions? Because the government eventually is going to be pinging us and penalizing us for our carbon emissions at a very large number. Like it is no joke. It's going to start becoming an issue where properties' values will, be non-existent because you have to pay so much to operate them because your carbon emissions are over whatever limit the local legislation has derived. So, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time to figure it out, and it's going to take time to implement. And all these technologies are new, just like the rest of the PropTech space. So no one can hand you a package solution, say, here, if you do these things, you'll be net zero. And you can just write a check and be done. You got to figure this out between solar and buying renewables and heat pumps and chiller replacements. There's so many things you have to deal with, and it's going to take a long time, and you're going to need a big team to deal with it. So that's why all of a sudden, it really holistically, investors, your tenant base, resident base, ownership groups, from every angle, sustainability has become very important, and you're going to pay if you don't figure out a solution.
Yeah, I think as developers and operators, we just have to do it. I mean, it's just that plain and simple. You just have to get it done. I think from a prospect and a resident perspective, they definitely value it. They like the idea of feeling good about the fact that they're doing something green, because as the management company, you've placed, whether it be certain technologies or certain software platforms that allow them to feel like they're contributing to the environment. And so they enjoy that aspect of it, so you tout it, right, as part of the living experience. I will say that people are willing to pay a little more for it. They're willing to pay a little more for it in certain parts of the country more than other parts of the country. So I think it's important to be able to assess that and make sure that you're not outpricing yourself from the market. So that is really important. And when it comes to the resident experience, what we have found is as much as people talk about sustainability and being green, people really don't know what that means other than talking about recycling and saving energy. So there's an education process for the residents as well. So if you are going to up your rent and you're going to include things that are associated with being green and sustainable, everybody has to be very well educated as to how to sell that, whether it be on the website or one-on-one presentation, so that people are willing to pay the extra dollar for it.
And can I ask, what do you do for those areas that aren't as woke, so to speak, as the rest of them? How do you educate them?
Are you talking about regions in the U.S.?
Regions or, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, from an
I want to be as politically correct as I could,
Yeah, so I mean, from an education standpoint, it's as much as you can communicate, right? That's what the resident experience is about.
Yeah.
So you can use different platforms, so like Modern Message or Captivate programming, or you can use different platforms like Amenify or different things, programs that you might be utilizing already as communication tools. You can also do the very traditional, whether you have the TV screens in the elevators or in the fitness centers, and just pop up informations and tidbits continuously so that they feel better educated about what you are accomplishing on site. Because if you're accomplishing all these great things and the development team has invested all these dollars to do all these wonderful things to make the buildings more energy sufficient, well, they're not going to know if you don't tell them about it.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to communicate those changes so that they start buying in, they start getting it, so when they come to renew and you up their rents again and you explain to them why you're doing that, you can have sustainability as part of that reason.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, and this is something that has obviously been known for a long time, right? After the Paris Agreement, like real estate knew that they were going to have to make a change. But really only in the last, I don't know, year and a half, this topic has really exploded, and I think the learning curve has gone up incredibly over the last 18 months. What people know today is so much further than what they knew a year ago, and I think that will only increase, with especially just with obviously access on the internet, our renter base knows so much more now than they did, and I expect in 6 months it'll be, even more so. And I think they're willing to learn. It's not like one of those things they look at and they're like, well, whatever. I think if you put out as a property from the property management team, I'm sure, we're doing these things and this is what it means and this is what it affects. Like, they are actually interested in it and they will read into it and they take that into account. Whereas before, I think it was just more, it was a nice to have. But really, over the last year, this has become more important, and it's only going to grow. So if I'd recommend anybody in the real estate management business and in real estate ownership, this is something, if you don't know a lot about, you need to start digging into, because there's so much information. And one of the biggest issues, so like all the goals that companies are going to have to get to, is related to reducing your energy consumption, water, waste, electric. And most real estate companies don't know what they put out today. Yeah. So even companies like mine who know about it and want to do this, we don't have whole building data on everything, right? So the first thing you have to do is you're going to have to invest in meters for, different areas where you don't have meters. And again, that takes time. And which company do you use, and how much are you going to pay? And do you do it at the per unit, by the unit, or at the building entrance? Like there's so many pieces to make that decision before you can even try to reduce your consumption. Because if you can't measure it, you can't prove it, it doesn't do you any good. In the end, for your reporting. So
I do think too, as we think about ESG holistically, I agree with everything that we've said around sustainability, but I think we're also seeing, especially as residents are looking to feel a sense of community, the diversity, equality, and inclusion is also becoming more and more important. I think one of the things that really surprised me over the last 18 months is how often our on-site teams are expected to speak to things that are going on in the community. If there is an event, a demonstration, anything that impacts the residents, now they're suddenly caught in the middle and need to be able and confident to be able to speak to their residents and in a way that resonates to them. And I think one of the things that we've been really focused on is when it comes to residents understanding the value of ESG, whether it's sustainability, DEI, other forms of ESG, it's getting our team members educated and talking about it and creating a culture internally where we're having this dialogue so that when a resident comes in or a prospect comes in, it's a natural conversation of, hey, we're excited to be doing these green things in our building, and I'm excited to talk to you about them, or I'm excited about this diversity event that we're doing in the building as a community event. And trying to get past we just put the LEED certification on the door and we called it a day.
Mm-hmm. I want to dive into this diversity inclusion more as well, but Alex, what role, we're talking about a lot of initiatives that owners and operators can take to gather residents around an initiative. What role can technology play in doing this?
I think that technology plays a big role, again, layered with the right, staff and property management, systems and processes. But the way that you can communicate with residents and tenants today, technology is on the forefront of the distribution of information, products, and services. Technology helps you enable that type of communication interaction. In a weird way, it creates a connectivity between the property ownership and the residents. And then from there, you can distribute different products and services that can help do things like events and experiences. Again, without technology, those things become very inefficient in scale to do so.
Yeah.
So I think, again, using technology to distribute helps you enable that connectivity in a weird way. But there are personal and interactions that are created, whether it's experiences and events.
Yeah, that's great. And then more into this diversity and inclusion, especially pertains to tech. As you guys are, excuse me, diving into more initiatives like this, are you able to use tech to measure whether it's a new property and we're going to strategically develop in an area that brings more inclusion? What role does technology play in inclusion and diversity?
So from a technology standpoint, I honestly think that is yet to be seen.
Okay.
And that's just my opinion. Our company has embraced the whole DEI effort along with the sustainability effort, and both of them are very complicated. The DEI one is probably even more so complicated and a very sensitive topic for obvious reasons. So the whole education process of getting our associates well trained to really understand, buy in, and want to be a part of a greater community of people is very important. And so there are different technology systems, even something as simple as Microsoft Teams, to be able to help enhance the whole communication process and share and disseminate information. But you can only share and disseminate so much. You have to figure out how to convey the culture throughout your company for people to really want to embrace this and want to be a part of it and understand how to utilize or not utilize the appropriate words, because it is sensitive.
Yeah.
It is sensitive. So I think technologies that allow us to be able to figure out how to communicate and in a very strange way autocorrect things that are being said or not said from a communication perspective, because not everybody is a great writer, not everybody is a great speaker. So you can't have expectations of your on-site teams or otherwise that people will really know how to send the message appropriately. So I think what's going to be coming next are technologies that help with the writing and the creation of the proper verbiage and lingo to be able to maximize this opportunity to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And I completely agree, Gigi, that I think especially on the DEI side, there's PropTech or just technology in general, we haven't seen as much that is really enabling that for residents and team members. There's some small point solutions. I do think there's a little bit of an interesting thread around as we look at surveys and like customer and team member sentiment and insights. I think at least as I look around at Greystar, we're still very much in that like looking at just averages and statistics of what is the customer satisfaction, how are they rating on these different scales, but we don't really dig in and start to understand the sentiment and some of the deeper data within, especially the like free responses. And so that's an area that is something that's kind of a passion project for us, is really starting to take some of that machine learning concepts to our survey data so we can start to find these trends of, where do they care about sustainability? Where is it worth investing in a huge communications campaign around ESG? So.
One thing I wanted to add to Adrian, I think is a really good component, is understanding resident sentiment. And I think where technology comes in line is we have so many touch points from so many different point solutions. Creating or having the technology, a unified experience, that becomes very valuable because you can then gather all of those touch points. And we've been studying user and resident sentiment, so you could spend a lot of time and focus on understanding truly, because different residents across a 1 million unit portfolio like Greystar, they go into different buckets and personas. So we've started to work with data scientists to help understanding what the true resident sentiment is, and there's different buckets for different personas within the community. And that bucket could be ESG, and it could be, it could just be, convenience and other items that are become very relevant and important. Yeah. But piecing it together, that connective layer is an important aspect of the future of really being able to solve some of those big problems long term. That's the benefit of combining those point solutions into one connective. Over time, that's the goal, is machine learning and data science.
I think we need to remember that DEI is a very personal experience for so many people, that there is tremendous empathy and sensitivity that needs to go into it. And I think whatever information we can extrapolate is a wonderful thing, but at the same time, this probably for me is something that particularly would involve having one-on-one interactions with your residents. So creating small little round tables, or having a wine and cheese vignette where you invite 15 or 20 residents and give them the opportunity to speak with your staff in person. What can we do more to make you feel more at home, to give you a socially comfortable environment, and have those conversations that you can then take that data, right, and compile it into some format so it tells a story. But I think that person and that one-on-one approach is still extremely important when it comes to DEI.
Yeah. And I think most of us in the corporate world take for granted one of the major DEI initiatives in PropTech, and that is equality of internet usage and speed for all different areas of the US and the world. Just having access to that information and able to do school from home when needed for their children, and work from home for adults when they need to. And that equality spread not just in our cities, but obviously in the suburbs and in rural areas and in poor countries. That is a huge area that I think we forget is really PropTech and a DEI issue that hopefully the use of PropTech eventually will solve, and give that equal access to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Something we've touched on a lot as well is the on-site teams. What role are on-site teams and property managers? What role are they playing in your tech decisions?
I can kick off. I think it was actually really what Gigi said much earlier on, which is getting their insights early and often, both through touchpoint surveys and through conversations with them. And so we invest a fair amount of time in not only getting the survey data back, but talking to them and hearing their anecdotal stories of what's working, what's not working. And so they actually really are, as we think about user research and how do we understand the problem in the field, they're there at the beginning to help us source ideas and source problems and opportunities on site, and then we try to close the loop with them in the pilots to make sure that that they feel like it's something worth scaling, and we directly ask a net promoter score question of them of like, would you recommend this to your other communities in your area? And then also in the process design to see if they are seeing opportunities of where we can push either our vendor in their technology roadmap, or how we can push ourselves in our process design.
Yeah, I totally agree with Adrian. On top of that, many PropTech companies are solving the problem of menial tasks for the property management workers, right? The leasing agents that don't need to fill out guest cards, the phone calls where they're just asking for the address, or questioning the cost of a 2-bedroom or what the pet policy is, right? These PropTech solutions many times are solving that issue and letting our staff focus on higher level issues, higher thinking issues, and having a better quality of life job in the end, and not just doing something that an AI can handle. And with the cost of our employment base right now skyrocketing, this becomes a real issue, a real problem that's being solved through this automation of many of the services. And again, allowing us maybe not to need so much seasonal labor, but on top of that, allowing the property teams to focus on real customer service, especially at a time when customer service has become, the services have become such a demand, more so than what is just expected at market to begin with, knowing your the rents and the policies and showing a unit. So it's really allowing our staff to, a lot of the PropTech is allowing the staff to have a better job and allowing us probably to pay them a little more too, to do a higher quality job, since we don't have to pay someone to do the menial labor.
Interesting. So I want to open up to questions from our audience. A couple right here. One very practical. What percentage cost range for tech are you budgeting for annually? Slightly, strict information, but if there's a ballpark for, and it can range for operator and firm as well, but.
Well, there's enterprise level technology that is budgeted for, that is a known cost that we know, and we won't go into that range. New up and coming asset level PropTech has such a huge range. We generally aren't budgeting for it, but the conversation is constant, unless we've already signed a contract. The conversation is constantly being had with the ownership group and our portfolio managers, who are our clients' mouthpiece. If we're making sure they're okay with something before we're moving forward with it, whether it's budgeted or not. So the funds that you have to stay very strict within budget, we generally will wait to roll it out into the following year once a contract is signed.
We're typically budgeting anywhere from 50 to 75 cents a unit for any potential new initiatives. Doesn't mean we're going to spend that much, but that's in there for it on a per unit basis. Now that obviously doesn't include any other startup costs that are tied to implementing the program, et cetera, but that's what each property would budget in their budgets on an ongoing monthly fee. So again, I'm just emphasizing it doesn't mean we're going to spend it, but that's what we're budgeting.
I was just going to, my perspective is a little different. In general, I think it'll be just like for purposes of discussion. I think there should be two buckets of when you think about implementing technology, and one is some is thinking about cost center or cost savings, and then one is like really creating value or creation that could have subjective value creation. You take smart locks, for example. It's a very high cost, but I believe long term, as a developer, I brought in smart locks and access control over a decade ago when the smart locks and access control didn't really exist much in multifamily. So I took it from hospitality and brought there and thought long term I'd have significant value creation and efficiencies. So for me, that budget was different than spending on something subjective.
Yeah, and let me clarify that 50 to 75% is operationally. It's not development costs. Yep. When I say development, I mean construction and smart home technology.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the other hard part about budgeting. Is like a lot of PropTech could be capital, some is going to be expense. You just really don't know where it's going to go. So unless it's tough to budget for, other than just a random, flat guess.
Yeah, makes sense. Last question, and we're coming up pretty close on time, but I think it is pretty important. Kind of the chicken and the egg question. Do you define the problem first with PropTech, or do you evaluate something that might, so I will read this out. Do you define the problem first, or do you evaluate anything that might have a potential benefit?
So we have started taking a very clear approach to this, which is always define the problem first. What we found is that when we come and let the PropTech players define the conversation, we get lost very quickly. And I think it was Gigi who said it earlier, doing a little bit of a bake-off is both helpful because you know who the winner is, but you also are forced to you see different problems in each of the pilots, and it really forces your thinking, and it pushes our team to really think differently about it. And so we always will start with identifying the problem, being clear on what the domain is, and then go find all the players out there, and do a little bit of a selection, like a mini RFP/selection process, because that's what we found allows us to have a much better conversation internally.
Yeah, I'd say both.
Okay.
So we try to define our problems and go out and look for vendors that solve the problems. However, just from having done this for a while now, going to the conferences and talking to the different vendors, a lot of times there's problems that I was not even aware of. So then I learn about a product, and then I take those back to my teams and say, is this an issue for you? Obviously I'm not on site. And they're like, oh yeah, that would be a really great problem to solve. So I can't say we strictly start with the problems, because I'm not at every level of the real estate to where I'm going to understand all of the problems to begin with. But normally if there's a product, there's a reason for the product. So I would hope it's solving some sort of problem or adding some sort of value. And if not, we'll just pass on by at the expo.
I mean, I didn't know I needed to be attached to my phone like this all the time, but we do now. Awesome. Anything else from you guys?
I think the only thing that I would add to that is I think day to day our jobs are to solve issues that arise, right? Problem solving is what we all do in our jobs day to day. I think any company that sits back and just focuses on problem solving will fall so far behind everybody else you won't be able to catch up. So you have to be able to be forward thinking. You have to be able to figure out, where do we want to be 5 years from now? Where do we want to be 10 years from now? And what's going to help us get there? Because problem solving is what we're all supposed to be doing every day. But what's going to make us a better company down the road is something that we need to focus on strategically.
Yeah, I love that. Great way to tie it off. Want to give a special thank you to Alex and Lively for sponsoring this session today. But thank you to all of you, Adrian, Kelly, Alex, Gigi. Round of applause for our panel today.